topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, welcome to Bill Martinez Live. Glad you could join us and share a part of your day with us. We're going to be talking about Jenna Ellis. Boy, the mainstream media went nuts. It looked like, well, you know, Jenna Ellis, Donald Trump's attorney. Now, is she turning on Trump? Can she help the Dems put Trump behind bars? Those are the questions. Well, John O'Connor, the author of Postgate, How the Washington Post Betrayed Deep Throat, covered up Watergate and began today's partisan advocacy journalism and host of the Mysteries of Watergate Podcast. He served as an assistant U.S. attorney in Northern California, representing the United States in both criminal and civil cases. He's talking objectively about how Jenna Ellis becoming the latest Trump lawyer to plead guilty over efforts to overturn Georgia's election could impact Trump's case. And now there are two former Trump attorneys and Sydney Powell who have struck deals with the prosecutor. John O'Connor, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us.
Great, Bill. Good to be with you.
Well, I'll tell you, the left was going nuts. They thought, okay, this is it. I mean, they're already chomping at the bit. They just cannot wait to see Donald Trump behind bars.
Well, that's certainly the case that they can't wait to see that. I don't think that Jenna Ellis has anything to do with that process because of the unique nature of her plea. And like the other defendants who have pled, it sort of circles around the main issues in the case. That is to say, did Donald Trump really think that he had lost the election and was just BSing and telling falsehoods? I think anyone with an ounce of sense on one side or the other would say one thing about Trump is he was certainly rabid in his beliefs that he had been defrauded. I don't see how anybody could think otherwise. Now, the left might say, boy, he was deluding himself. And the right might say, well, gee, he had good reason to be concerned. But that doesn't make any difference. The fact is, both sides acknowledge that Trump really thought he had the election stolen out from under him and thinks that way today.
Yeah.
So that's the main burden of the prosecution in this case, a very sprawling indictment. So let me talk, Bill, if I can, about Jenna Ellis.
Just a second, John, for just a moment here. I just want to, you've got a majority of the country who believes, like Donald Trump does, that there were shenanigans in the election. Okay, a majority. Now, the question still remains, just because talk show hosts or talking heads from a newscast tell you that it's quote unquote the big lie, well, what happens if it becomes the big truth? Because how many things did they accuse Donald Trump of lying about that afterwards was the truth and not a lie? Are we waiting, for that shoe to drop, or, like any other story, like Dinesh D'Souza says, the one thing about cons is they always stick to the con. It's not like all of a sudden the left is going to get a conscience. So we're going to find out who orchestrated, the 2020 election. There had to be a small group that was involved to orchestrate what happened, where you could have 5 or 6 counting facilities shut down at the same time for about the same amount of time. Somebody orchestrated that, John, but the left is not interested in finding out who did that.
Well, you've got a good point there. If you go to any prison in the United States, you will find that everyone there, or maybe 80% of the people there in those prisons, will steadfastly deny their guilt, and
Right.
They've been set up in some fashion. And I think that's true of the left in this case. It's one thing for people on the left who like Biden to say, look, this was a COVID election. There were things wrong with it. We acknowledge that. But this is what we're left with. This was a bad election, but it's the best we could do. Let's move on. That's a principled position. All right. It is not a principled position to say that this is the most secure election in our history. The facts just are too extreme. And let me give you one, because we're talking about Georgia here, Bill.
Right.
In the last election before the 2020, I think it's 2018, whatever it was, in Georgia, 6.2% of mail-in ballots were invalidated for formal deficiencies. It might be signatures, it might be overvoting, undervoting, no external envelope, but 6.2%.
Yeah.
Now, it's expected that in an urban area, you're going to have more than that, especially when there are a flood of new voters who are not familiar with the situation. Normally, absentee voters are elderly or people who are on business trips and so forth. Now we're going to get this new influx of voters, and Atlantic Magazine acknowledged that on October 30th, 2020, when they talked about, through their expert at the Brookings Institution, that there was clearly going to be a climb, an increase in invalidated mail-in ballots. So what happened to our 6.2%? In Fulton County, Georgia, the percentage was not 6.2% or higher as predicted. It was 0.05%.
Wow.
It was 1/148th of the historical amounts of disqualified ballots, 1/148th. Now, some of that comes because Stacey Abrams dragooned Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, to tighten the way you can discard signatures, which was a terrible thing for Raffensperger to do. But nonetheless, that's an incredibly low number of discounted ballots at a time when there's all sorts of evidence that there was tremendous vote harvesting and tremendous increases in mail-in voting and so forth and so on. So that doesn't prove it enough for a judge. If I'm sitting there, I'm going to say, as a judge, I'm going to say, well, I can't overturn the election on this. Sure, it looks bad to me, but I can't do it. That's why we need safety at the ballot box, precisely because judges are not there to relitigate an election.
Exactly.
But now, and there may be one exception for the Wisconsin challenge, which was very clean, but most of them are not clean. Most of them, you can only grant the relief sought if you were to find as a judge that as to what the vote count actually is, and you can't do that. You'd have to call 1 million witnesses. So let's get back to what Jenna Ellis is pleading guilty to. Jenna Ellis had attended a meeting with other Trump representatives like Rudy Giuliani, in which they were pitching the Georgia State Senate to disavow the election, to say that it's up for grabs, and maybe this then goes to the Georgia House, but at least there would not be a certified slate that goes to Congress and so forth, and so on. So that was the situation. They were pitching the Georgia Senate. Now, Jenna Ellis sat there while other people there said that there were thousands of felons, underage voters, or dead people that voted in Georgia. Now, that, I think, probably they thought, whoever came up with that probably thought there was an inference to that effect. But in my view, it appears to be rank speculation that somebody just came up with those figures based on some way of looking at this thing, because I don't think there was any direct proof of those numbers. So somebody put those numbers out there. Okay. The Georgia Senate turned them down. It had no impact on the election, but Jenna Ellis did not come up with those numbers. Now, she pled guilty because she was facing $1 million in legal fees and potential disbarment, as well as jail time.
Right.
And the poor girl was a 34-year-old young lawyer who had practiced basic insurance defense litigation. She was out of water here, and is a nice young lady who was trying hard to be part of the team.
Right.
So she sat there during this thing. She pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting those false statements. Well, technically she did. She came into the meeting. She was there. She didn't disagree. She probably nodded her head. And she said in her plea, I should have done more to check out these numbers. I agree with that. I mean, as a lawyer, I don't like to make allegations in a court of law or in a formal proceeding unless I have a basis for it. Okay?
Exactly. So wait a minute, hang on one second. Let me real quick, John. So what is this telling attorneys in the future? That in any kind of meeting, especially if it's a political meeting, that you need to make some sort of pronouncement, some sort of disclaimer that says, I am here listening. I am taking information. I'm here to advise the president or the leader, and so that you have some sort of out on this deal, because it seems that she was there in the company, and like you say, she may have nodded, may not, maybe by her own admission in retrospect, said, well, maybe she could have done more. So what does more look like?
Well, it's silly. In this case, it's an extreme example of prosecuting this thing. I mean, technically, you can prosecute this, so I'm not objecting to that. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying that every day, right now, there are probably 1,000, right as we're sitting here, there are 1,000 lawyers pitching a government agency to their belief in the facts of a case.
Right.
And in many cases, those facts just are not supported. People don't get prosecuted for that. I was an assistant U.S. attorney, both in civil and criminal matters. Mm-hmm. People would come to my office and say, John, we have to change this government program, or my client is innocent because of X. And sometimes those facts are just made out of whole cloth. And we know that. We're lawyers.
Right.
That's what lawsuits are about. Somebody is not correct. Somebody has the facts wrong. So this is a one-off. Normally, you don't prosecute somebody. I want people to come to my office and make their pitch when I'm working for the government. And then later on, I work for the various FDIC and the government agencies. And the same thing happened. People would come in and say why their loan was really correct, and they didn't fudge on their disclosures to the bank, and so forth and so on. I don't prosecute people or try to prosecute. I would not even think about that, because now what are we doing? The whole process is now bound up. You want to give people freedom to make their allegations. So you are correct, Bill. This is an extreme application of the false statement to a government. Okay. Now, having said that, if you look at it, if you file a pleading in a court, especially a federal court, you have what they call Rule 11 obligations, which is you got to make sure that what you're saying has some basis in fact. Mm-hmm. But even when you violate Rule 11 and you put in an allegation that turns out to be phony and you didn't support it, you don't go to jail. The judge will sometimes say, okay, O'Connor, I'm going to let you go this time. If the court is upset with you, you get a $10,000 fine or something like that, a $5,000 fine. So you don't go to jail. Right. Okay, but let's put that aside, because they have the right. I'm not challenging their right to say this is a false statement to a government agency. She aided and abetted. But remember what she said was, she didn't know that those things were false. She didn't think they were false. She thought they were true. What she pled guilty to, and they accepted it, was I didn't do my due diligence. I'm not in checking those facts out. I'm not so sure she was obligated to, but it was a good thing to plead to. Now, if she went to trial, the jury would have to find her knowingly violating a law, knowingly with criminal intent. I think she would have been acquitted of that charge.
Yeah, but how many millions of dollars would it have cost her to get to that point? Exactly.
Now she skates. The poor girl is packed on about 30 pounds out of stress. Her cortisol is obviously out of whack. You look at the pictures of the poor young lady, and I feel sorry for her. She doesn't have a lot of money. She's looking at $1 million. If she gets convicted, which this jury could easily do in the massive amount of evidence that's going to come over the transom, and now she's in jail for a couple of years. She's disbarred. She's broke. Maybe she doesn't even get her fees discharged in bankruptcy, her fine discharged in bankruptcy, because it's might be moral turpitude and that sort of thing. So she faced an unsuperable burden on her. She got out, but if she comes into court and tells exactly what she pleaded guilty to, it's not going to have an ounce of problems for Trump, and I think Trump's lawyers see that. Now, let me hedge. Now that she's pleaded, though, she has no Fifth Amendment rights. Therefore, the government can, and she said she'll testify, and she has to anyway, because she has no Fifth Amendment reason not to testify.
Right.
So now they can come in and question her. So the $1 million issue at that point is, does she have anything to say, beyond what she pleaded guilty to? And I don't think she's going to. I don't think this is a person who says, "Oh yes, we plotted to to defraud all these states." These were true believers. She's a nice young lady. So what I look at this is this plea indicates the weakness of the case. When you start accepting pleas to peripheral charges that are meaningless, that don't get to the heart of this, and give people $5,000 fines and probation. In 2 of the 4 pleas, they were misdemeanors, which is very close to a traffic ticket.
Right.
Two of them were felonies. Chesborough and Ellis pled to felonies, but the things they pled to were so vanilla. It's ridiculous. I mean, Chesborough pled guilty to putting forth an alternative slate of electors, which is what one does to challenge an election.
Exactly. Right.
Now, once again, he didn't think he was doing something illegal, but he pleaded to it to get out of this thing.
To make it go away. Yeah.
Right. In other words, Bill, he knew, and everyone else knew, that he was not claiming that these electors were actually the slate of electors, if you counted the votes that these electors would be, if you counted all the votes as they were counted, that this was an alternative slate in the event that someone decided that the results were too weak. Here's the alternative slate. So he never said anything but that this was an alternative slate. But it's a good thing to plead to, because when he goes before the bar, if he's trying to stay in the bar,
right,
he's going to say, "Look, here's what I did." And the bar association can say, "Yeah, this isn't anything. This is not a crime of moral turpitude. And as a matter of fact, I don't think it's a crime."
Exactly.
And then Sydney Powell pleaded guilty to accessing voter information in Coffee County and perhaps some other places without authority. In other words, you had to have authority from Brad Raffensperger to get this information. She didn't have it. She was representing the president, and we have a federal system, so you have to go through the state. They're not authorized to get the information. Coffee County wanted to give it to Trump. They just didn't go through the right hurdles to do it. Right. And so they said, "Oh, listen." In fact, I think they called the Trump campaign and said, "Hey, we've got some stuff. We'll give you our voting information." And it meant nothing. It turned out Coffee County ran their elections right anyway.
Right.
But that's the kind of stuff that they're pleading guilty to, and it's nothing. And this Brad Hall, the businessman, pleaded guilty to the same thing. He ended up helping him scan information from Coffee County. So what we've got a really a Potemkin village of a case. Right. It looks shiny on the outside, but once you get beyond it, there's nothing there.
Well, and it's so unfortunate, John, because what this has done to public sentiment, and it really has divided the country all the more. And it has made politics so distasteful. I mean, this democratic republic, it owns its existence on the backs of we the people. If we the people check out, then goodbye to this constitutional republic.
Well, that's right. And the thing, our constitutional republic thrives on discussion and debate. That's the only way we in the democracy can get information. First of all, to have an unbiased media that gives us the factual information. And secondly, that we discuss and debate. But what these lawsuits are doing and these charges are doing, they're criminalizing the whole process of discussion and debate. Debates throughout our country's history have often had wild allegations that are thrown out, starting with, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson back in 1800. This is what happens. People come up with all these theories and so forth and so on. That's part of the democratic process. We want people to air their grievances. We want people to discuss and debate, and that's what our Constitution's about. And the hope is that in the end, truth will emerge and falsehoods get set aside as they're debated. But now what's happening is we're getting penalized. the January 6th committee talks about the quote, the big lie. And
Right.
anybody supposedly is telling the big lie who breathes a word that this election is not perfect. Well, it wasn't perfect. And it's irresponsible. My problem with Liz Cheney is not that she thought Trump acted poorly. That's certainly her right.
Right.
But what is not her right is to say that all these people, 56% of the population,
Right.
by the way, think that there was something wrong with the election. Are they all lying?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think they're looking as jurors of public opinion, the jury of public opinion. They're looking at the facts as they see them. They say, based on these facts, it looks to us like something smells here, something's rotten in Denmark.
Exactly.
And that's what this is all about. Now,
well, the problem is, though, John, about a lie, it doesn't go away. It irritates people. It's like, I tell people all the time, it's like, when your little kid, lies to you, he's lying. They know they're lying. It's hard to sleep at night until you finally address it and it finally clears up, right? That happens in households every day, even as you and I are talking right now. That just happens. But in a political environment like this, the lie is still there. You can hide it, you can obfuscate it, do whatever you want to do. It's still there. And what these politicians don't understand, or even criminals for that matter, is that eventually it catches up to you. And when it does, it's much more complicated. It's much more expensive, and your credibility is destroyed in the process. And, they're playing a very serious game here. And I think that, what you touched on earlier is also important, John. And that is that in the past, especially with, political debate and that, the courts and the tradition has been to, let's treat this sensitively. Let's not get into a situation where we're looking like we're going after our, political opponents. If we go down that road, that's not good. Hillary Clinton suggested as much in 2016, and here it was. All it took was 4 years later, and this is exactly what's happened. We've gone down that road, and it is a dark, ugly hole, and I don't know how we get out of this, John.
Well, this is my pitch. This is why I wrote Postgate, the book, Postgate, because I see that the media is not being square with us. And
Right.
if the media is square and trying to get to the truth, yes, you're going to get some lies that are out there momentarily, but eventually things get worked out. And that's what John Stuart Mill talked about in On Liberty. He said, basically, the more discussion and debate you have, the more the truth wins.
Right.
But I'll also quote Winston Churchill, who said, a lie gets halfway around the world before truth gets his pants on.
It's on. Yeah, exactly.
And that's what we've got now.
And it's important to have this discussion. I mean, we have to hold on to that, as uncomfortable and as frustrating as it can be. We must hold on to that time-honored process to have an open debate. If you close off the debate, you do so at the expense of democracy.
That's right. And it really hurts the whole body politic when that happens.
Yes.
And so what we're doing, it's all sort of part and parcel of cancel culture. In most authoritarian states, you try to have a one-party press that pushes a propaganda and tries to punish those who don't go along with the propaganda.
Exactly.
That's sort of what we've got. We've got a press that is not really here.
Yeah.
Is not really here to engage in a fulsome debate. For example, right now, if I were to come up with facts, tell a reporter, by the way, I've been looking at this climate change and I've looked at the recent research I look at, which I follow, and it looks to me like the amplification that's supposedly there from carbon dioxide is not really there. It's very mild. And therefore, I don't think we need to spend trillions of dollars on climate change. I think it's an issue. Please, let's look at these different findings by the various scientists that I could cite to you. Look at these findings. Look at these studies. Now, if I did that, tried to do that, first of all, they wouldn't publish me. And secondly, if I did say something to somebody like to Bill Martinez, and it became widely known. I would be known as a climate denier, rather than somebody saying, "Oh, here's what I say about what O'Connor says, and here's why I think he's mistaken. He's mistaken because he's reading these studies wrongly. He should look at this other study, and it really kind of talks better about what really is happening up there in the top of the atmosphere." That's fine and dandy. I don't mind being wrong, but I would like to know if I'm wrong. I mean,
exactly.
I think for me, if I put forward my views of the climate, why can't somebody just engage with me? But you can't do it. You're a climate denier. And I'll tell you how bad it is, Bill. When I write my book, Postgate, it's about how the Post defrauded readers into and defrauded the country into getting rid of Richard Nixon on false information. Now, you would think that would be something, my thesis would be something that if I'm wrong, I should be debated. I'm happy to have that debate.
Exactly.
But no, that's not what happens. The very nature of it is such that people are trying to cancel that message precisely because they know I'm right. And there isn't any answer. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, the deal is going back to what you were talking about earlier in terms of climate denying is that, I was just having this conversation with an investigative reporter with the Epic Times. I said, the problem you've got is you get these government paid scientists. All right. They know which side, their bread is buttered on. And so the government, Fauci says, or whoever it is, who's ever, whoever's in charge of, for the climate, and they go out and they buy these research papers. And so it is prejudice. But those research papers, John, which is so frustrating to me, I wish they could come with a disclaimer saying this was sponsored by the U.S. government, by who it was, and the other associated parties that sponsored and paid for this research. So then when it's quoted, people know what's the level of veracity. Are they really being objective, or just, because they're using our money, taxpayers' money, to pay for this propaganda, and then they present it as matter of fact, so that when John O'Connor or Bill Martinez comes in, and what do we know? We're just a couple of idiots that are in search of the truth, and we talk to some other scientists that are not bought and sold. They're not beholden to the government or some three-letter agency, and they say, hey, here's the information. Straight up, follow the science. It's right there. And you go, wow, that doesn't reconcile with what Al Gore and his compadres are saying. Well, that shuts us down because now we're climate deniers because we're in pursuit of the truth and we don't want to insult our constituency.
Well, right. And I'll give you one better. It is true that these scientists are on the government dole and they're encouraged to go one way and try to go out of their way to ferret out evidence of the hypothesis.
Right.
But I'll give you one better.
Well, they're not encouraged. They're compelled to do so. If they don't, they're not going to get another research paper.
Well, that's right. But here's what I'm telling you. They're trying their best, but most of them are fairly honest about what they report. Even if they fudge things and try to put in fudge factors into their equations. Oh, we must not have taken into account aerosols. That's why our model doesn't quite fit. But here's another thing that people don't publish is that when you get an IPCC, that's the United Nations Climate Panel, when they publish their summary for policymakers, that's something that is a bunch of politicians putting together. That isn't the scientists. So the scientists sometimes come up with findings that are direct opposite of what the political people in the United Nations say. So this happened in 1995, for example, when the scientists came up with the conclusion that there was no evidence that that man-made causes were causing any kind of substantial temperature increase.
Right.
Now, what happens is when the IPCC 90 days later put out, and those summaries were not available to the public, then the IPCC digest them, they come out with their statement before the scientific papers are out there, and they say just the opposite in their summary. So everybody says, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. Well, in fact, they're saying something that the scientific papers don't say. And so there's that added aspect to it. And it's not just the fact that you correctly point out that these younger people are paid to try to get the right results and doing everything they can to try to explain why there really is climate change. But having said that, it is really more the political side of this that is driving the agenda. And what's worse is all these major media have climate reporters that never report on this basic issue.
Exactly.
What is the climate? What are the issues that are alive out there? And there's some very, very live and very well-regarded research that now puts the potential rise in temperatures way down below what they were at the beginning when Al Gore first started shooting his mouth off. That's the state of the science right now, that it looks like, it's not for sure, but it looks like the effect is very mild of carbon dioxide, and it's getting milder as we increase the carbon because it's getting saturated. Its effect is saturated. I say it's like having so many mitts outside the left field wall at Wrigley Field in Chicago when people are out getting their gloves for batting practice. And at a certain point, adding another mitt does not get you any more balls caught. And at a certain point, you can add carbon dioxide, and because it only responds to 14 micron waves, at some point, all the 14 micron waves are going to be caught, so to speak, by the molecules, and that's going to be it. So carbon dioxide is of limited utility in causing warming and limited cause, and therefore we may be changing our entire society, weakening ourselves on national security. We enriched Russia and Iran by raising the price of oil per Biden's climate agenda. And now what we are, we not only are punishing our people at home with high prices, we're punishing industry with high gas prices. We are also helping our most hated enemies. $90 billion a year to Vladimir Putin extra, and $90 billion a year extra to the Iranians.
I was going to say, the mullahs are loving Joe Biden. Are you kidding me?
Oh yeah. And then you couple that with the weakness that we've shown in trying to get an Iran nuclear deal, which we're so weak in our negotiations, we asked Russia to help us. So Russia is actually our mediator in helping Iran get a nuclear weapon.
How crazy are we right now? We bring Russia into negotiations with Iran, one of the key sponsors of terrorism. Oh yeah, by the way, we got a little war going on in Israel and the Gaza, and then here we are supporting Ukraine in a fight against Russia. I mean, we're really, as a human condition, John O'Connor, we're a mess.
Well, right. One of the things that's happening right now that nobody reports on is Iran is providing drones to Russia to kill people. And it's, again, that the American people are trying to support the Ukrainians. And Russia, of course, is helping Iran and so forth and so on. And they're in Syria helping out the Syrians, which are really proxies for Iran. So it's very silly. And then, of course, China's in on the deal, too. And all this, we are helping our enemies. We are helping our enemies and hurting our friends. And I don't care how many tough statements Biden makes in the daylight about standing with Israel, because in the nighttime, under the cover of darkness, he's really helping Israel's enemies and our enemies.
Exactly. Well, it concerns me when you have Joe Biden as the commander in chief, and he's trying to orchestrate and get his fingers involved with what's going on with Israel's business. If I was an Israeli, I'd be, as an American, the idea that we are on a foothold of two wars right now with Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah and I mean, could go regional, and we could end up igniting World War III here, as you mentioned, with Russia getting involved, China's involvement as well, what they're doing there in the South China Sea, and with Taiwan licking their chops. And you got to know, President Xi already said, look, we're going after Taiwan. He's told his military, get ready. By 2027, we're going to own Taiwan. So, all this is on the brink, and we've got Joe Biden as the commander in chief. It scares the holy what have you out of me.
Well, that's right. And of course, about 80% of our most sophisticated chips are made in Taiwan.
Right.
And they fuel our AI industry and cloud storage and all our most sensitive military applications. China gets their hands on those chips and deprives us of those chips. We're in a world of hurt. And are we able, especially without energy independence, are we able to fight a two-front war? That is to say, one in the Far East and one in the Middle East? I don't think so.
Right.
And I think
Joe Biden has already told the enemy that we're running out of ammo. So, and look what's happening with China's Navy. I think China's Navy has expanded, 10 times, in the last decade or so. I mean, they are aggressively expanding. Their ships are not quite as sophisticated as America, but nonetheless, just in sheer numbers, look what they're doing.
Well, we're overspending, Bill. We're probably wastefully spending about $1 trillion a year for sure, based on Biden's inflation, mainly caused by fuel. And we're sending the money to our enemies, but we're spending more of it. So rather than having that money to protect ourselves, we're spending it on buying gasoline and so forth and so on. So it would be really nice if we could spend money on fortifying our national security. Also, keeping our country out of ridiculous, existentially threatening debt, which happens. We're now paying 300% of the T-bill rate than we were paying when Trump left office.
Exactly.
So now we're paying 3 times as much for our national debt in interest payments, besides all the payments we're making on a daily basis for fuel and those things that are made with fuel, which is everything.
Exactly.
And so we're in trouble, mainly because of these heedless things. But what I get down to, Bill, and you and I are really talking about this, and we're sort of dancing around it, is there the people who are supposed to be giving us information are not giving us this.
Yes.
A high school junior who took basic economics would say, well, if there's inelastic demand for oil and you artificially constrict the supply, won't prices shoot up dramatically like a hockey stick? Right. And the answer that a junior in high school would tell you is yes, of course. Yeah. That's you can answer that question and still get a C on your paper, because that one is so easy.
Right.
And yet no one in the press has said that to the public. By the way, if Biden does this, this is what's going to happen. Now, so that's what really bothers me, is the lack of information that's getting to our citizens and voters.
But the thing is that what happens, though, John, the people get it because they go to the gas station, they're paying the price, they go and buy groceries, they get the price. You get all these, you say these supposedly high-minded officials of the government and that want to tell you why Bidenomics is working, when they know, everyday people, 345 million Americans that make up this country of ours, they know firsthand it's not working. It is a mess. So it just really makes the mainstream media and other purveyors of information who are supposed to be looking out for our benefit, it makes them look all the worse, because they're not delivering the facts to the people, but the people themselves have to find a way to decouple from this government. And, to wait another 2 years for God only knows what else and what other damage Joe Biden can do is too much. And so I have been saying, I think you and I have talked about it before, that at a local level, things can change quite rapidly. And we've got to do something. You've got to get off the couch. You cannot just sit there and just let this happen to you, because we're on the other end. You and I have been warning people, John, forever that America's been at a tipping point. But I've been saying recently, we're beyond that tipping point, because what happens when you're beyond that tipping point, things move faster. Look at the rapidity of things that are happening, political and all things within our country and around the world. They have sped up exponentially. And the reason they have is because we're on the downside of the mountain, heading fast and getting ready to crash and burn. And so, if we just sit there and just let it happen to us, well, then shame on us. What kind of America are we turning over to our kids and grandkids?
Well, you can see it right now that the young people are getting tremendously distressed and anxious. Some of that is because they've been fed fear and distress more than practical thinking.
They've been lied to, John, and they're finding out they've been lied to. I mean, how would you feel spending, okay, I'm $250,000 in debt for this, piece of paper and this education I was promised I was going to have such a great job, 6-figure job, coming out, I'm, all that in a bag of chips, and they're going out in the world and finding out, well, that's not exactly the case. Well, that has a tendency to depress people.
Well, but I don't think a lot of these young people even realize they've been lied to. They believe, for instance, the climate change. They see but they do, to your point, do see a dark future that they correctly see. And so these people are not having kids. They have tremendous anxieties and depression. There's a raft of suicides.
Oh my gosh, yes.
All sorts of depression and anxiety. Kids are on meds. They're doing all sorts of self-destructive things. It's a very unhappy younger generation here, and with good reason. And some of it is the things that are fed these people in college, and they're not taught to critically think and to address issues. And if you're trained to critically think, you can get rid of some of your worries because you can confront things and say, no, this isn't true. I don't think the world is ending with climate change and so forth and so on. But we have done terrible things to the younger generation, but more importantly, we've done terrible things to our country.
Yes.
And we really are on the precipice. I just wish it weren't so. I'm too old to have this happen, and sometimes I think, well, maybe it's good that I'm old because I'm out of here soon. But no,
but I think you and I are in a similar situation, John, is that we're in a position to encourage people. And because what drives me nuts sometimes, and I'll tell you, it drives me nuts in as much as that, I'll read in the Bible about how judgment will come, to a king, a prophet will come to the king and say, God's going to judge you. But by the way, it's not going to happen in your lifetime. It'll be in your kid's lifetime. And you read right after that where the king says, well, okay, I guess that's okay because it's not going to happen while I'm alive. I mean, to me, what a cop-out. I think that you and I are here at this point in time to encourage this next generation to whatever we have left in us to fight for this great American experiment that you and I grew up under, that we were blessed by. And I believe that America's better days lie ahead, but it lies ahead in a revival of sorts that will return this country back to the first principles that it embraced when it first became this great American idea.
Well, I think it's not too late, but it's getting close to too late. And I agree with you on that. If we have to go through 4 more years of this, I think it will be too late.
Oh, I do too. That's why I think we do now. We have to do. We can't wait 2 years from now. We need to decouple, from all these. It's like one church. I heard about this church that they got, John, during COVID. The government sent them, several millions of dollars. Well, who is going to not take a check from the government and say, oh, okay. But this church was smart enough to realize the ties that bind, and they sent the check back. And so my question was to all the other churches, how many of you cashed the check, or did you send it back?
Yeah, that's it. That's the problem. Government is makes us take these things. And this is, of course, what happened with the Obamacare deal. We bribed states to take the near-term benefit and then put ourselves in a hole. So we're in a hole in so many places. And then, of course, don't we should not even get started about the border and
I was
all
just
the
going to say,
implications
Yeah.
that involves. So we've got that problem. And, now it's not just dependent, poor Hispanic people that are coming over who are actually good workers and so forth. And there's some argument to be made for them. But when you start getting terrorists coming across from other countries, which are it's clearly happening.
Well,
we don't know
and there would be terrorists too, John, because these people may be nice people, but when you're beholden to the cartel and the cartel slaps a bracelet on your wrist and says, this is your occupation, this is your identity and your job when you're in America, because if you don't do that, we know where you live and we know where your parents are and we will kill them.
Well, that's right. That's right. So we have serious problems here, and we are discounting now the fact that there could be some major terrorist actions in the United States.
Yes.
9/11, most of the time our country has avoided the 9/11s with good counterintelligence, and the public doesn't realize how many times we've avoided these things. But I think with Iran's money and with Russia's money and with China's money, and China has clearly infiltrated our government.
No doubt.
Iran now. People forget that Joe Biden had this guy Rob Malley,
yeah, right, exactly.
Was a clear pro-Iranian guy, and he had his fellow pro-Iranians, and they burrowed their way into government and are doing all these things.
Who, by the way, they're still working. By the way, they're still in the government. His three amigos.
That's right. No, those are the kind of people we've hired. If you hark back to the Russian collusion investigation, there were clear government agents. I'll name one, Olga Galkina, that she bragged to her people that once Hillary won, she had this good job with the State Department. Now, a high school senior could look at her resume and see that she's clearly Russian intelligence.
Right.
I mean, she had been in the Russian communications, various state communications for years. And then she transforms herself for a few months into a business person that's supposedly over here on business. Well, it's just nonsense. But if Hillary won, she would have been in our government. Igor Danchenko was advising our government. Fiona Hill was very close to him, and she's in our government. So you start to wonder what a job we do in terms of vetting intelligence. Look at Eric Swalwell. How many, and then Dianne Feinstein's chauffeur for years.
Exactly. Well, and how about Debbie Wasserman Schultz? I'm here in Florida, and what she got away with, when she was head of the DNC, and she had several operatives. Even one of them, did kind of like a Hunter Biden. He left his laptop at the airport or somewhere where it was open. And it had all this information on the Democratic Party. And of course, Ms. Schultz was throwing a royal fit because of the information that was on that laptop.
Well, was he, and I hadn't heard that, was he any kind of a foreign agent?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, see, I didn't know that.
And we were paying him many six-figure amounts of money. And of course, he brought in his relatives, so they were all part and parcel of this whole deal. It was a mess.
Really, it's too bad. And they're so silly. And you don't find that as much on the conservative side of things.
No.
And yet the problem gets back to the messaging. The people who vote don't understand a lot of these things you and I are talking about. And that's what's very frustrating, because I'm a believer that the system roughly works, but you have to have information out there.
It goes back to what you were saying. Our First Amendment to our Constitution, a free and fair press that is supposed to hold the government accountable. John, we got about 45 seconds left. I'm going to let you wrap up and summarize everything and bring us home here, if you would, please.
Sure. Well, I think the summary, Bill, is that this latest prosecution by Fani Willis is really a big bunch of nothing right now. I'm not saying people won't eventually get convicted in Fulton County, but the plea deals mean nothing. And this is really the Lilliputians going all over Trump. And it's just a shame because you talk about enemies of democracy. They're trying to interfere with the democratic process. They're prosecuting somebody they don't like. I don't have any problem with the fact that people don't like Trump. I understand from a personal point of view and from a taste point of view,
right?
They may not like Trump. I understand that. All the fancy ladies that are friends of my wife don't like Trump, or most of them don't like him because he's kind of a vulgar guy.
Mm-hmm.
But does he deserve prosecutions in 4 locations and a civil suit to drive him out of business? Come on. It's just too much. And it really, you talk about something being anti-democratic. The Washington Post says it best, but of course, full of irony. Democracy dies in darkness. They proclaim on their masthead every day. And that's what's happening now, Bill.
Yeah, without a doubt. John O'Connor, the author of Postgate, How the Washington Post Betrayed Deep Throat, Covered Up Watergate, and Began Today's Partisan Advocacy Journalism. He's the host of the Mysteries of Watergate podcast. He served as an assistant U.S. attorney in Northern California, representing the United States in both criminal and civil cases. John O'Connor, thank you so much for being with us. Be blessed. Thank you, sir.
Good to be with you, Bill.
Always a pleasure. Our thanks to Jonathan O'Connor, John O'Connor, for being on the show today. And thank you for joining us and being a part of this mighty movement to return to God and to save our country. That's a wrap for us. May God bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you. And may he be gracious unto you and give you his peace. Thank you so much for being with us. Take care. God bless.
This radio commercial was made to convince you to stop speeding. We can't